Right, thank you. Thank you and very much welcome to this introduction to our research on sustainable consumption and communication in sustainable consumption. I will make a short overview of our research project, and then Maria Johansson and Annie Eklund and Ann Grubbström will talk more about some preliminary results and research design that we are on the way to develop. So our point of departure in this project is that sustainable consumption campaign has been part of the environmental governance system since the early 1980s, and there's in society a lot of faith that we can produce responsible consumers. And while that hope is there is also from sociologists a bit of a warning or a question mark that sustainable consumption campaigns might just reproduce the consumer society, and also a society where consumption is constitutive for identities and society, and therefore not solve the environmental problem, but maybe just reshape the environmental problems. So one question is, how can that sort of negative perspective on change be taken into consideration when planning and designing environmental campaigns, and how can that be done through a reflexive language for change? And we also recognize that in the language of communication planning, there is sometimes on one hand a lot of emphasis of message construction with a sender perspective, and on the other hand a lot of again hope that information and knowledge will be strong motivation factors of individuals, and that's not really in line with psychological research about motivation and the situation individuals are in when they make their decisions. So our overarching question is how these different critique can be integrated into reflexive language for talking about communication and change when designing campaigns. And in order to develop that, we will also research what kind of language and models and assumptions and ideas are currently cultivated in communication campaign management, and how can this language be developed into reflexive direction. And in doing so, we have started with looking at the language used in newspapers. Ann Grubbström has done content analysis of how Swedish newspapers and magazines write about environmental campaigns and write about change. And maybe Ann, you will present some preliminary results on that.
Yes. You want me to start now?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Lars. I'm happy to share with you some preliminary thoughts from this study that we have just started, and this will definitely link also, I think, to the presentation from Nita and Delaney. And the focus here is, how does the daily press write about sustainable consumption and campaigns? And the sample here, I have looked at 5 years of articles from 2015 to 2020. I've not finished yet, but I'm in the middle of it. And the keywords for the search was sustainable consumption and campaign. And we look at Swedish printed press. It's not foreign press, not radio or TV included. And the search gave 97 articles. And right now I'm in the middle of the coding here. And I've started from some overarching questions. The first one, in what ways are the problems of unsustainable consumption expressed? And if we look to what the authors write about this, what happens and what does not happen, and what obstacles and opportunities for change are highlighted in the articles. And one way of writing about this is to problematize what actually happens. If we look at the individual level and then you think about yourself. You want to buy a bike maybe, or a nice dress, and then you resist this desire to purchase this bike or this dress, and you feel very good about that. But it's highlighted by the authors here that actually you maybe instead spend the money on something else, and in the end it's not a sustainable behavior. And also it's written about companies that have sustainability as a very important strategy, maybe on their websites. And so also articles about how companies or stores resist Black Friday and join the resistance campaigns like the one Buy Nothing Day, and even maybe close their store that, on Black Friday. But at the same time, we know that they need to make money. So how much of this is an image? And Delaney, you talked about trust. So here it's a bit about, can we trust this? And what is it worth? And it's also written about campaigns. And then it's a lot about feelings and how they create feelings. For example, by showing a place or showing an environment, and it might create a feeling that we feel calm, we feel good, or we feel that we are on vacation, having a good time, these kinds of feeling that it creates. And this is a quote here you see from a jury. It was the competition about the best campaign. And the motivation was, well, this campaign creates feelings that it is not expensive or boring to consume more sustainable. So if you're, for example, interested in fashion, you can feel that you're cool and you can be trendy without buying new stuff. You can buy in secondhand stores. Also, that the communication is associated with moral and ethical values. So you get the feelings maybe that this corresponds to my values. This is me, this is what I stand for. And it's also written about criticism of creative feelings of guilt, maybe for buying things on Black Friday, or fear that you don't have a positive future to look forward to. It's also written about consumption as something that is moral, addresses ethical issues, political issues, like this quote here from Språktidningen. Food consumption has become moral and political. To buy the right thing is taking the fight for a sustainable planet. So in a way, it's like, tell me what you buy and I will tell you who you are. So I have some minutes left because I have 5 minutes in total to say something short about how it's written about the way forward and obstacles. And I think it is obvious that it's a lot about the individual responsibility, our own behavior, and also how that could influence companies to increase their commitment to global challenges or global goals, and increase their community engagement. One of the authors posed the questions like this: can companies afford not to meet consumer demands? And talking about obstacles, it's written like it's a lot of a double message that we get as individuals. We must take responsibility for environment and through reduced consumption. And they write about it as is the norm of being sustainable, and think about sustainable consumption is getting stronger. But at the same time, we have this other message all the time that encouraged us to consume. And it's this dilemma that is really hard for us. And the whole society is built on consumption. Yeah, so I think I'll end there. I hope I managed to not take more than 5 minutes. Thank you. And leave the word to Anne. The other Anne?
Yes, I'll start sharing my screen as well and see if that works. And Let's see, do you see our screen? Yeah, good. So I think Maria will start talking and I will be right back shortly.
Yes. So this work package on the environmental communication bit sustainable consumption, it very much also includes the individual. And as Anne mentioned here before, when we look into the societal discussion of this, it's very much the responsibility of the individual person that is stressed. And that means to understand how communication ideas and communication ways of working, how they actually will work towards the individual, we need to attend to the individual perspective. And that is what we are going to do in part of this work package. And we will rely on the knowledge that has been gathered in the field of environmental psychology for more than 50 years. This discipline looks into how the environment shapes people, but also how people shape their environment. For example, how we are affected by the light of the environment, colors, noise, access to nature. It all plays in. What is important to consider here is how we are affected by a place. I think all of us remember a certain setting where we really like to be, or a place where we really dislike to be. But I don't think most of us really had tried to understand what in that particular environment made us think, feel, or behave in a certain way. So how we will use environmental psychology here is that this discipline offers ideas, but also words, how you can speak about it and how you can analyze it. And we think it's important to try to understand the place where people actually are when they get or get acquainted to the information that's posted in the communication. And how we're going to use this previous knowledge, Anne Eklund will continue to explain to you.
Yes, so as we've heard both Maria and Justus say already, a lot of focus is placed on the individual in sustainable consumption and moving towards a sustainable society. But of course, individuals don't live isolated in a bubble, isolated from the rest of the world, but rather the individual is part of a larger social environment, a community, society, or a culture. So as part of this community, the individual shapes the community, but the community also influences greatly the individual, how the individual feels and acts. So this highlights how interesting it is then to look at this as a multi-level perspective, or from a multi-level perspective, as an interplay between the individual level and the collective level when we look at pro-environmental behaviors such as sustainable consumption. And that's much what we'd like to do in this work package. And environmental psychology in this work package provides then a complementary perspective from the individual side, or the individual perspective, to the analysis of the campaigns that are intended to encourage sustainable consumption. But although environmental psychology acknowledges the importance of the social environment on individuals' behaviors and emotions, the unique perspective of the discipline relates to the importance that is placed on the physical environment. So the interaction then between the individual and the physical environment that he or she is in. And there are many possibilities to apply theory and methodology from environmental psychology to understand an individual's reaction and behavior in various situations. And this also relates to communication, of course. And Maria has already given you examples from previous research where the importance of the physical environment has been highlighted as an important influence on behavior and reactions in a given situation. And these external stimuli, both social and physical environment stimuli, interact with the internal motivations in the individual and affect the processes within the individual to when he or she processes goals in relation to relation to the context that he or she is in. And this then together shapes the individual's emotion and behavior in the end. So within the work package 2, the role of environmental psychology will be to investigate how campaigns that are intended to encourage sustainable consumption, how they influence the individual behavior or purchase behavior in an online shopping scenario. And as we saw from Anne Grubström's presentation again, from the analysis of the daily press, in the daily press, it's assumed quite often that these campaigns can generate emotions in people by using pictures of places and environments. It's also often assumed that the campaigns can activate an association to moral and ethical values within the individual when he or she takes part of the campaign or attends the campaign. But of course, the individual doesn't encounter the campaign from a vacuum. He or she is in an environment when he or she sees the campaign or interacts with the campaign. And as I've already mentioned, both the physical and the social environment will also be able to influence the psychological processes and emotions of the individual. So it's quite logical to think that these two influences interact, both elements from the campaign and elements in the contextual environment of the individual. They will interact to shape how the individual processes the campaign message. So we think that potentially the campaign message might not, or the effect of the campaign rather, might not only be influenced by how the campaign is designed, but might be very much influenced also by the interaction with the physical and social environment of the individual. So the effect of the campaign might vary between different settings and situations. And what we more specifically do, what we plan to do within this work package, is to set up a full-scale lab experiment where we'll simulate a home environment in which participants will be asked to perform a task where they do an online shopping task. And they will be subjected to elements from a campaign that is encouraging sustainable consumption. And within this lab scenario, we're then able to manipulate the physical environment surrounding the individual to see how this influences the behavior, the online shopping behavior. So for instance, if we add elements in the physical environment that relate to natural features, could that potentially encourage biospheric values or activate goals that relate to sustainable behaviors? And or if we add other stimuli, could that have the opposite effect? And how does that influence the behavior in relation to the campaign message that the participants have been exposed to? But this experiment is very much in the planning stage at the moment. So during the workshop, which is the week after next, we want to make this a very interactive workshop where we hope that participants will be able to give us input and feedback on the experimental design, and also on what cues in the environment might be interesting to look at specifically. And we also want to get the participants' help in prioritizing features in the campaigns that might be particularly interesting to use. For instance, should we focus more on images or text? So we want to get that sort of feedback and a lot more. So the plan is to make it very interactive, and we're hoping, of course, that many of you will want to attend the workshop a little more than a week from now. So that's all that I have as well. And I don't know if there are questions for the entire project already. Or...
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I switch off the recording now.